Welcome back to my channel, where we uncover the forgotten corners of the past. Today, I'm taking you into a story about the macabre mystery of the three brothers born without bones or blood that you might have never heard before. A mystery buried in the dust of time, a truth that will send shivers down your spine. But before we embark on this journey, take a moment to let me know, where are you listening to this story from? That helps me understand how far these secrets have traveled. And if this story truly captivates you, if it makes you ponder, don't hesitate to give me a like and subscribe to the channel to keep me going. Together, we'll explore the darkest pages of history, and you won't want to miss a thing. There are stories that linger in the shadows of history, whispered from one generation to the next. Their details blur with time, but their chill never fades. In the winter of 1832, beneath the heavy silence of Missouri's snow-laden woods, a secret was born, one that would haunt the people of Hollow Creek for generations. It began, as such stories often do, with a question that no one dared to answer aloud. What if some children are not meant for this world? That year, the wind was relentless. It howled through the bare branches of ancient oaks that ringed the settlement like silent sentinels. Snow fell in thick, suffocating drifts, muffling every sound except the occasional crack of ice or the distant, mournful call of a lone wolf. Hollow Creek, a modest frontier outpost, seemed to shrink beneath the weight of winter. Its scattered cabins huddled together for warmth and comfort against the encroaching dark. Even the bravest souls, men and women who had carved their lives from the wilderness, felt a peculiar unease settle over the town as January deepened. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the stillness. On the night of January 17th, as the temperature plummeted and the moon hung low and swollen above the treetops, a frantic pounding shattered the uneasy quiet of Dr. Samuel Thornton's cabin. The doctor, a man of science and reason, had come to Hollow Creek 5 years earlier, bringing with him the promise of modern medicine and the quiet confidence of someone who believed every mystery could be solved with enough study. But as he opened his door to find Jacob Miller, the blacksmith, wild-eyed and breathless in the freezing air, even Thornton felt a flicker of dread. "Doctor, you must come quickly. It's the Blackwood place. Martha's in labor. But something's wrong. The midwife says she's never seen anything like it." Miller's words stumbled out in a rush, his voice trembling with urgency and something else. Something like fear. Thornton wasted no time. He gathered his medical bag, wrapped himself in his thick woolen coat, and followed Miller into the night. The journey to the Blackwood homestead was a trial in itself. The horses struggled through snow that reached their knees, and the wind bit at exposed skin. The farm sat at the edge of the whispering woods, a dense and ancient forest that the locals avoided after dark. According to Reverend Phillips's journal, the woods had always been a place of unease, a boundary between the known and the unknowable, where the wind seemed to carry voices that were not quite human. Ezekiel Blackwood had moved his wife Martha to this isolated property only 8 months before, purchasing it from a family who had left in haste. Their reasons never fully explained. The Blackwoods kept to themselves, rarely venturing into town, and their presence was a subject of quiet speculation among the townsfolk. Some said Ezekiel was running from something in Kentucky. Others whispered of deaths, or worse, of curses that followed certain bloodlines. As Thornton and Miller approached the farmhouse, The doctor heard Martha's screams slicing through the night, raw and unending, unlike any labor he had ever attended. Inside, the air was thick with the metallic tang of blood, and something else, something sweet and putrid, like sap left too long in the sun. Candlelight flickered across the faces of those gathered. Widow Hawkins, the midwife, her hands shaking as she wiped Martha's brow. Ezekiel, silent and unmoving in the corner, his eyes fixed on the floor, lips moving in a soundless prayer. Thornton's first touch to Martha's abdomen sent a jolt of confusion through him. The movement beneath her skin was wrong, too fluid, too shapeless. Widow Hawkins whispered, "They move like water. Doctor, I can't feel a head, nor arms, nor legs, just writhing." The doctor's rational mind rebelled, searching for explanations, a rare deformity, perhaps, or a trick of the senses, brought on by exhaustion and fear. But as the hours dragged on, and Martha's cries faded to a hoarse whisper, the truth became impossible to ignore. When the first child emerged, Thornton nearly dropped it in shock. The infant was pale as moonlight, its skin almost translucent, its limbs bending in ways no human body should. There was no resistance, no structure, no bones, and when he cut the umbilical cord, not a single drop of blood appeared. The midwife crossed herself, backing away. "It ain't natural," she muttered, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. 2 more children followed, each identical to the first, boneless, bloodless, yet undeniably alive. Ezekiel finally rose from his chair, his face unreadable, and named them Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah. There was no joy in his voice, only a grim finality, as if he had been waiting for this moment all his life. Thornton, ever the scientist, tried to make sense of what he had witnessed. He examined the children, searching for any sign of normalcy, but found none. Their eyes were cloudy. Their chests rose and fell with shallow, uncertain breaths. When he questioned Ezekiel about family history, the man replied only, "They are as they were meant to be. The vessels have been prepared." The doctor left the Blackwood farm that night with a sense of unease that clung to him like a second skin. Widow Hawkins urged him to leave before nightfall, her voice trembling with a fear she could not name. As they rode back to Hollow Creek, Thornton glanced back at the farmhouse and thought he saw a figure in the upstairs window, tall, thin, and watching. In the days that followed, the story of the Blackwood triplets spread through Hollow Creek like wildfire. Some whispered of changelings, children swapped by spirits in the night. Others spoke of witchcraft, of bargains struck in the dark. Thornton tried to quell the rumors with science, writing letters to colleagues in Philadelphia, searching medical texts for any precedent. But the more he searched, the more the mystery deepened. The town itself seemed to change in the wake of the birth. The snow fell heavier, the nights grew longer, and the woods pressed closer to the edge of the settlement. Livestock were found drained of fluids, but without wounds. Children began to draw strange symbols in the dirt, their sleep troubled by dreams they could not remember. The general store's ledgers recorded fewer visits from the Blackwoods, and when Ezekiel did appear, he spoke little, his eyes darker than ever. According to records from the era, Hollow Creek was a place where the line between the natural and the supernatural was always thin. The settlement had been founded by men and women fleeing the chaos of the East, seeking a new beginning on the edge of the known world. But the land they claimed was old, older than any map, and the stories of the native tribes who once lived there spoke of beings who came from the stars, who required vessels born without structure. The Whispering Woods, so named for the ceaseless susurrus of wind through its branches, was both a refuge and a threat. Hunters who ventured too deep sometimes returned changed, their eyes haunted, their memories fragmented. Others did not return at all. The woods seemed to shift, paths disappearing and reappearing, landmarks changing position. It was said that the trees themselves remembered, that they watched and waited. Within this uneasy world, Dr. Thornton became both observer and participant in a drama he could not control. He documented everything in his journal: the appearance of the triplets, the strange fluid that seeped from Martha after the birth, the symbols that began to appear on the children's bedroom walls. He noted the growing fear among the townsfolk, the way conversations would falter when the Blackwoods were mentioned, the way even the bravest men avoided the woods after dark. Ezekiel Blackwood, for his part, remained an enigma, tall and gaunt, with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed to drink in the light. He moved through the town like a shadow, always on the periphery, never lingering. Some said he was a man marked by fate, others that he was the architect of the town's misfortune. Martha, once seen tending her garden or chatting quietly with neighbors, was now never glimpsed outside the farm. The children, too, were kept hidden, their presence confirmed only by the occasional flicker of movement behind a curtain or the echo of a child's laugh carried on the wind. Yet it was not only the Blackwoods who changed. Dr. Thornton himself began to feel the weight of the mystery pressing in on him. He found himself waking in the night, heart pounding, certain he had heard voices whispering his name from the darkness outside his window. His dreams were filled with images of water flowing uphill, of children with eyes like blank mirrors, of a stone altar deep in the woods, slick with a fluid that glowed in the moonlight. The first true sign that something was deeply wrong came not from the Blackwoods, but from the land itself. A trapper named Thomas Reed vanished while checking his lines near the edge of the Whispering Woods. His cabin was found empty, a strange viscous substance smeared across the door frame. A month later, a young girl disappeared while gathering berries, her trail ending in a pool of clear, sap-like fluid that led toward the Blackwood farm. The town's fear grew, fed by rumor and the inexplicable. Reverend Clark, the settlement's preacher, urged calm, warning against superstition. But even he could not ignore the mounting evidence the livestock found drained, the children's strange drawings, the way the woods seemed to whisper louder with each passing night. Dr. Thornton, torn between his duty as a physician and his growing sense of dread, began to watch the Blackwood farm from a distance. He camped in the woods, his medical bag and rifle close at hand, hoping for answers. For several nights, he saw nothing but the shifting shadows and the endless dance of moonlight on snow. But on the fifth night, as the full moon rose, he witnessed a procession, Ezekiel leading his 3 sons into the woods. Their movements fluid and unnatural, their pale forms glowing faintly in the darkness. He followed, heart pounding, through the maze of trees to a clearing he had never seen before. There, at the center, stood a stone altar, ancient and stained. Ezekiel began to chant in a language that made Thornton's skin crawl, and the children began to change, their bodies melting and reforming, symbols swirling beneath her translucent skin. From the trees emerged figures, tall, emaciated, their limbs bending in impossible ways. Thornton pressed himself against a tree, paralyzed by fear and fascination. He watched as Ezekiel raised a knife made of bone, as Martha, her belly swollen once more, was brought to the altar. The doctor's mind raced, searching for explanations, for some way to intervene. But his body refused to move. In that moment, as the ritual reached its crescendo, Thornton understood that the mystery of the Blackwood triplets was not merely a medical anomaly, nor a family curse, but something far older and more terrible. The children were not victims, nor monsters, but vessels prepared for a purpose that defied human understanding. As dawn broke over Hollow Creek, the town awoke to a world forever changed. The snow seemed heavier, the woods darker, the air thick with secrets. And in the heart of it all, 3 children, without bones or blood, waited, their eyes fixed on a future only they could see. A hush had settled over Hollow Creek, but beneath its surface, the first tremors of unrest began to ripple. It started with a single inexplicable event, a flock of crows, black as spilled ink, descending upon the church steeple at dawn. Their cries echoed through the empty streets. The townsfolk watched in uneasy silence as the birds circled, then scattered, leaving behind a single feather, slick with a clear, viscous substance that shimmered in the morning light. No one could recall seeing such a thing before, and yet no one dared to speak of it openly. In the days that followed, subtle changes crept into the fabric of daily life. The bell at the general store, once a cheerful chime, now rang with a hollow metallic note that seemed to linger in the air. The school teacher, Miss Abernathy, found her chalk breaking in her hand, the dust swirling into strange, looping patterns on the slate. At the edge of the settlement, the old mill wheel turned slower, groaning as if burdened by an invisible weight. These were small things, easily dismissed, yet together they formed a pattern that only the most observant could sense, a pattern that whispered of something gathering strength just out of sight. One evening, as dusk bled into night, a group of children gathered near the edge of the whispering woods, drawn by a compulsion they could not name. They stood in a silent circle, their eyes wide and unblinking, their hands tracing symbols in the dirt, symbols that none of them remembered learning. When their parents found them, the children could not explain what had happened, nor why their palms were stained with a sticky, sap-like residue. The incident was dismissed as childish mischief, but the unease it left behind was not so easily washed away. Meanwhile, the town's preacher, Reverend Clark, began to notice a change in his congregation during Sunday service. The usual murmur of prayer was replaced by a tense, expectant silence. Eyes darted nervously toward the windows, as if searching for something lurking just beyond the glass. The Reverend's own dreams grew troubled, filled with visions of roots twisting through the earth, of voices rising from beneath the floorboards, calling his name in a language he could not understand. It was during this time that a series of strange disappearances began to plague the settlement. First, a trapper named Jonas failed to return from his rounds. His cabin was found abandoned, a half-eaten meal still on the table, and a trail of clear fluid leading from the door into the woods. Then, a young girl vanished while picking wildflowers. Her bonnet discovered snagged on a thorn bush, the ground beneath it damp with the same unearthly substance. Each loss was a blow, and with every new absence, the town's sense of safety eroded further. The sheriff, a man known for his steady hand and unshakable resolve, organized search parties, but the woods seemed to swallow all efforts. Paths that had been familiar for years now twisted and turned. Landmarks vanished, and the air grew thick with a low, constant whisper that set nerves on edge. According to historical accounts, several searchers reported seeing fleeting shapes moving between the trees, pale, childlike figures that melted into the shadows before they could be approached. As the days grew shorter and the nights colder, the pressure mounted. Livestock began to sicken and die. Their bodies found drained of fluids, their eyes clouded and empty. The town's healer, an elderly woman with a lifetime of experience, confessed herself baffled. "It's as if something is feeding on them," she whispered to the sheriff, her voice trembling. "But I can find no wound, no mark, only this." She held up a scrap of cloth stained with the now familiar clear fluid, its surface glistening in the lamplight. Rumors spread like wildfire, fueled by fear and the unknown. Some whispered of a curse, others of a sickness brought by outsiders, and a few, in hushed tones, spoke of the woods themselves as a living, hungry thing. The town's children became restless, their sleep plagued by nightmares. They spoke of voices calling to them from the darkness, of dreams in which they wandered through endless corridors of trees, always searching, never finding their way home. The tension reached a breaking point when, one night, the church bell rang out at midnight, though no hand had touched the rope. The townsfolk gathered in the square, their faces pale and drawn, as the sound echoed through the empty streets. In the silence that followed, a single word was found carved into the church door vessel. No one claimed responsibility, and no one could explain how the carving had appeared overnight, its edges sharp and fresh as if cut by an unseen blade. In the days that followed, the town's leaders convened in secret, desperate for answers. They pored over old records, searching for any mention of similar events. In a dusty ledger, the Reverend discovered a passage written in a trembling hand. "When the woods whisper and the children dream, beware the vessels born without bone or blood, for they are the key, and the gate waits to be opened." The words sent a chill through the room, and for the first time, the possibility of something truly unnatural was spoken aloud. As the community grappled with its fear, a new pattern emerged. The children who had been found at the edge of the woods began to change. Their eyes grew distant, their voices flat and monotone. They spoke in unison, reciting phrases in a language no adult could understand. Their drawings became more elaborate, filled with spirals and symbols that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The town's schoolteacher, once a pillar of reason, found herself unable to remember simple lessons, her mind clouded by a persistent, buzzing static. The pressure on the adults grew unbearable. Arguments flared over the smallest of matters. Friendships fractured, and suspicion blossomed like mold in the damp corners of every home. The sheriff, once so sure of his authority, found himself doubting his own senses. He saw shapes moving in the corner of his eye, heard laughter where there should have been silence. The healer's hands shook as she mixed her remedies, her confidence eroded by the mounting evidence that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. One evening, as a storm raged outside, the town's leaders gathered in the church, their faces illuminated by flickering candlelight. The Reverend read aloud from the ledger, his voice trembling. The vessels must be watched. When the moon is full and the woods are restless, the gate will seek to open. The words hung in the air, heavy with dread. In that moment, a decision was made. They would confront the source of their fear, whatever it might be. A search party was formed, composed of the bravest men and women the town could muster. Armed with lanterns, rifles, and a handful of hastily drawn maps, they set out into the woods, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves. The forest closed around them, the trees pressing close, their branches arching overhead like the ribs of some great beast. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, and the only sound was the soft, persistent whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. As they pressed deeper into the woods, the searchers began to notice strange markings carved into the trees' spirals, eyes, and other symbols that seemed to shift and writhe in the lantern light. The ground grew soft and treacherous, their boots sinking into patches of clear, sticky fluid that clung to their soles. The sense of being watched grew stronger, and more than one member of the party glanced over their shoulder, certain they would see someone or something following in their wake. Suddenly, the group stumbled upon a clearing, its center dominated by a massive stone altar, slick with moisture and etched with symbols that glowed faintly in the moonlight. The air was electric, charged with a sense of anticipation and dread. At the edge of the clearing, 3 figures stood motionless, their forms indistinct, their eyes reflecting the lantern light with an unnatural, colorless sheen. The leader of the search party stepped forward, his voice steady but strained. "Who are you?" he called out. The figures did not answer, but as the wind shifted, the searchers caught the scent of something sweet and rotten, a smell that turned their stomachs and set their nerves on edge. One of the party, a young man known for his courage, took another step forward, and the ground beneath his feet gave way, swallowing him in a pool of viscous fluid. The others pulled him free, but his skin was marked with strange, swirling patterns that glowed faintly in the darkness. Panic threatened to overtake the group, but the Reverend's voice cut through the chaos. "We must not turn back," he insisted. "The truth lies ahead." With renewed determination, they approached the altar, their lanterns casting long, wavering shadows across the stone. As they drew closer, the 3 figures melted away into the trees, leaving behind only the echo of their laughter, a sound that was both childlike and ancient, filled with a malice that chilled the blood. On the surface of the altar, the searchers found a series of objects, a child's doll, its eyes sewn shut, a length of braided hair, still damp, and a scrap of parchment covered in symbols that seemed to writhe and shift before their eyes. The Reverend reached out to touch the parchment, and as his fingers brushed its surface, a vision flooded his mind, images of children standing in a circle, their hands joined, their voices raised in a chant that resonated with the very bones of the earth. The revelation struck the group with the force of a physical blow. The disappearances, the changes in the children, the strange fluid, all were connected, threads in a tapestry woven by hands unseen. The altar was not merely a relic, but a focal point, a place where the boundary between worlds grew thin. The searchers realized, with mounting horror, that the town itself was caught in the grip of a ritual older than memory, a ritual that demanded sacrifice and obedience. As the full moon rose higher, the air in the clearing grew thick and oppressive. The symbols on the altar pulsed with a sickly light, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The searchers huddled together, their fear palpable. As a voice rose from the darkness, a voice that was many and one, child and ancient, speaking in a tongue that twisted the mind and chilled the soul. In that moment, the truth became undeniable. The children of Hollow Creek were not merely victims, nor were they entirely innocent. They were vessels, chosen and prepared for a purpose that defied human understanding. The gate was opening, and the town stood on the threshold of a nightmare from which there could be no easy escape. The clearing, once a place of silent dread, now became a crucible of revelation. As the moonlight sharpened the edges of every stone and branch, the searchers found themselves surrounded not by shadows, but by evidence tangible, undeniable, and cold as the night air. The altar, slick with a residue that glowed faintly, bore the imprint of countless hands, both large and small. Embedded in the grooves of its surface were strands of hair, some dark, some golden, all matted with the same viscous substance that had haunted the town's nightmares. Near the base of the altar, a collection of objects lay scattered: a child's shoe, its leather warped and stained, a silver locket, snapped open to reveal a faded miniature portrait, a length of ribbon, knotted and frayed. Each item was a silent witness, a fragment of a life interrupted. The sheriff, his hands trembling, gathered these tokens, laying them out in the lantern light for all to see. There was no denying their origin. Each belonged to one of the missing, their names whispered in the hush that followed. But it was the parchment, discovered wedged between two stones, that shattered any lingering doubt. Its surface was covered in symbols, spirals, eyes, and runes that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The Reverend, his voice barely above a whisper, read aloud the words scrawled in a trembling hand. The vessels are prepared. The gate will open. The price will be paid. The meaning was clear, and the horror of it settled over the group like a shroud. As the searchers absorbed the weight of these discoveries, a figure emerged from the darkness at the edge of the clearing. It was the healer, her face drawn and pale, her eyes wide with terror. In her hands, she clutched a journal, its pages stained and torn. "I found this," she gasped, hidden beneath the floorboards of the old mill. The journal, written in a spidery script, detailed rituals, names and dates, records of offerings made, of children chosen, of promises kept and broken. The entries grew more frantic, more desperate, as the years passed, culminating in a final chilling line. "They come when the moon is full. They take what is theirs." The sheriff, reading over her shoulder, felt his resolve falter. "Here," At last was proof that the town's suffering was not the result of chance or misfortune, but of deliberate, calculated acts. The evidence was overwhelming, impossible to ignore. The searchers, once united by fear, now found themselves bound by a grim determination. The truth, long buried, had clawed its way to the surface. In the days that followed, Hollow Creek was gripped by a fever of confession and accusation. The healer, racked by guilt, revealed her own role in the rituals, how she had been coerced, how she had tried to resist, how she had failed. Her voice broke as she described the nights spent in the woods, the chants that echoed through the trees, the faces of the children as they were led away. I thought I could save them, she wept, but I was only feeding the darkness. Others came forward, their secrets spilling out in a torrent of shame and fear. The blacksmith admitted to forging the tools used in the ceremonies, his hands stained with more than just soot. The schoolteacher confessed to teaching the children the symbols, believing them to be harmless games. Even the reverend, his faith shaken to its core, acknowledged his silence, how he had turned away, refusing to see what was unfolding before his eyes. The confessions tore through the community, leaving wounds that would not easily heal. Families were divided, friendships shattered. The sense of safety that had once defined Hollow Creek was gone, replaced by a raw, aching vulnerability. The children, those who remained, wandered the streets in a daze, their eyes hollow, their voices flat. The town's elders, once pillars of strength, now moved like ghosts, haunted by the knowledge of what they had allowed to happen. Yet, even as the truth came to light, the horror did not abate. The nights grew longer, the woods pressed closer, and the air was thick with a sense of impending doom. The altar, though abandoned, seemed to pulse with a malignant energy, its symbols glowing brighter with each passing night. The townsfolk, desperate for relief, turned to the law, to faith, to any authority that might offer salvation. The sheriff, acting on the evidence collected, ordered the arrest of those implicated in the rituals. The healer, the blacksmith, the schoolteacher, all were taken into custody, their fates to be decided by a hastily convened tribunal. The proceedings were tense, fraught with anger and grief. Testimony from the period records the anguish of the accused, their pleas for mercy, their desperate attempts to explain their actions. We were afraid. The healer sobbed. We thought we had no choice. The tribunal, torn between justice and compassion, struggled to reach a verdict. Some called for harsh punishment, others for forgiveness. In the end, the decision was a compromise. Those found guilty were exiled, sent beyond the boundaries of the settlement, forbidden to return. The altar was destroyed, its stones scattered and buried deep in the earth. The woods were declared off limits, a place of exile and forgetting. But the damage had been done. Hollow Creek, once a place of hope and promise, was now a community marked by loss and betrayal. The children who survived bore scars that would never fully heal. The elders, their authority undermined, struggled to rebuild trust. The church, once a sanctuary, stood empty, its doors barred, its bell silent. In the aftermath, a new order emerged. The town's leaders, chastened by their failure, established strict rules. No one was to enter the woods. No child was to be left unattended. No secret was to be kept. A watch was established, a group of volunteers who patrolled the borders of the settlement, their eyes ever vigilant for signs of danger. The memory of what had happened was preserved in whispered stories, in warnings passed from parent to child, in the scars that marked the land and its people. Yet, beneath the surface, the old fears lingered. The woods, though silent, seemed to watch and wait. The altar, though destroyed, haunted the dreams of those who had seen it. And the children, those who had been touched by the darkness, grew up wary and watchful, their innocence forever lost. The truth had been revealed, the guilty punished, the community changed, but the shadow of the past remained, a reminder that some wounds never truly heal, and some secrets refuse to stay buried. In the weeks that followed the tribunal, Hollow Creek became a place suspended between memory and forgetting. The routines of daily life resumed, but they did so under a pall, as if the very air had thickened with the weight of unspoken truths. The market reopened, but the laughter that once echoed between the stalls was now replaced by hushed conversations and wary glances. Children played, but never strayed far from their parents' sight. And the games they invented were somber, filled with rules about boundaries and warnings about the woods. The exiled, forced to leave behind everything they had ever known, vanished into the wilderness. Some were never heard from again. Others, it was rumored, tried to start anew in distant settlements. But the stain of their past followed them like a shadow. Letters sent back to Hollow Creek were rare, and when they did arrive, they spoke of loneliness, regret, and a longing for forgiveness that would never come. For those who remained, the process of healing was slow and uneven. The healer's cottage, once a place of comfort, stood empty, its windows boarded and its garden overgrown. The blacksmith's forge, silent and cold, became a symbol of the town's lost strength. The schoolhouse, too, was changed. Miss Abernathy, though cleared of the worst accusations, found herself unable to teach as she once had. Her lessons were halting, her eyes often distant, and the children sensed her fear, absorbing it into their own. The Reverend, burdened by guilt and the knowledge of his own failings, devoted himself to acts of penance. He spent long hours in prayer, his voice echoing through the empty church, seeking solace in scripture and ritual. Yet even faith offered little comfort. At night, he dreamed of the altar, of the children's faces, of the woods pressing ever closer. He began to keep a journal, recording his thoughts and fears, hoping that by naming the darkness, he might rob it of some of its power. According to later accounts, the psychological scars left by the ordeal were as real as any physical wound. Some townsfolk developed nervous habits, checking locks repeatedly, jumping at the slightest sound, avoiding the woods even in daylight. Others became withdrawn, their trust in neighbors and friends forever shaken. The children, especially those who had been found at the edge of the woods, grew up marked by a wariness that set them apart. They spoke little of what they had seen or felt, but their drawings filled with spirals, eyes, and strange, shifting forms hinted at memories that would not fade. The town's leaders, determined to prevent any recurrence, established new traditions. Every year, on the anniversary of the tribunal, a vigil was held. Candles were lit in every window, and the people gathered in the square to recite a pledge of vigilance and remembrance. The woods were patrolled, and any sign of trespass was met with swift action. The altar stones, though scattered, were said to be watched over by a silent guardian, a role passed down from one generation to the next, a living reminder of the price of complacency. Yet, for all these efforts, the sense of unease never fully disappeared. There were nights when the wind carried strange whispers, and mornings when the dew on the grass shimmered with a faint, unnatural glow. Some claimed to see figures moving at the edge of the trees, pale, fleeting shapes that vanished when approached. The children, as they grew older, sometimes spoke in their sleep, their voices rising in unison to chant words no adult could understand. The legacy of the events in Hollow Creek became a cautionary tale, told and retold as both warning and lament. Outsiders who heard the story dismissed it as superstition, a relic of a more fearful age. But for those who had lived through it, the memory was as sharp as ever a reminder that evil, once invited in, is not so easily banished. In time, the town changed. New families arrived, drawn by the promise of fertile land and a fresh start. The old wounds faded, but never vanished. The woods remained, a boundary both physical and psychological, marking the edge of what was known and what was feared. And in the quiet moments, when the wind was just right, the people of Hollow Creek would pause, listening for the faintest echo of the past, a whisper, a footstep, a child's laughter carried on the breeze. For in the end, the greatest horror was not the rituals of the disappearances, nor even the confessions wrung from trembling lips. It was the knowledge that darkness, once awakened, could never be fully put to rest. It lingered in the soil, in the stones, in the hearts of those who remembered. And so, the watch continued, year after year, generation after generation, a fragile bulwark against the return of the nightmare, and a testament to the enduring power of truth, however painful it might be. The collapse of old certainties came not with a single thunderous blow, but as a slow, relentless erosion. In the aftermath of revelation, Hollow Creek was forced to confront the hollowness at its core. The structures that had once defined the town, its church, its school, its council, remained standing, but their foundations had been shaken to the point of ruin. The rituals of daily life continued, but they did so in the shadow of a truth that could not be unlearned. The market square, once the heart of communal life, now felt like a stage set for a play whose actors had forgotten their lines. Neighbors passed each other with downcast eyes, their greetings clipped and formal, as if afraid that any warmth might betray the wounds beneath. The laughter of children, when it came, was brittle, echoing off the empty facades of shuttered homes. The air itself seemed heavier, thick with the residue of secrets and the memory of voices raised in accusation and confession. Some families, unable to bear the weight of what had been revealed, packed their belongings and left in the dead of night, seeking new beginnings in distant towns where the name Hollow Creek meant nothing. Others stayed, but their presence was marked by a wariness that had not existed before. The boundaries between friend and stranger, kin and outsider, had been redrawn in blood and silence. The land, too, bore the scars of upheaval. Fields once lush with promise now lay fallow. their furrows choked with weeds. The woods, forbidden and unyielding, pressed ever closer to the edge of the settlement, their shadows lengthening with each passing season. The river, which had once been a source of life and sustenance, now seemed to flow with a sluggish, mournful current, as if mourning the innocence that had been lost. Official records from the period note a marked decline in births, marriages, and other signs of communal vitality. The town's population dwindled, not only through exile and flight, but through a slow, inexorable fading of hope. The elders, who had once been the keepers of tradition, now found themselves adrift, their authority undermined by the very truths they had helped to conceal. Yet, in the midst of this collapse, there were those who sought to rebuild. A new council was formed, composed of men and women who had not been implicated in the old order. Their first acts were practical: the establishment of a night watch, the reinforcement of boundaries, the creation of a written code of conduct that forbade secrecy and demanded transparency. But these measures, though necessary, could not erase the past. They could only hope to contain its echoes. The process of redefinition was painful and incomplete. Every attempt at renewal was haunted by the specter of what had come before. The new school teacher, a young woman from a distant city, found her lessons interrupted by questions she could not answer about the woods, about the altar, about the children who no longer played in the fields. The preacher, a man of unshakable faith, struggled to fill the pews, his sermons falling on ears that had grown deaf to promises of redemption. In private, the townsfolk whispered of omens and portents, a flock of birds circling the church steeple at dusk, a patch of ground where nothing would grow, no matter how often it was tilled, the sudden, inexplicable illness of a child, whose fever broke only after a night spent in restless, wordless dreams. These signs, whether real or imagined, served as reminders that the past was not so easily buried. The fate of those most closely touched by the events remained a subject of speculation and sorrow. The healer, exiled and alone, was rumored to have wandered the forests for years, her mind unraveling in the face of guilt and isolation. Some claimed to have seen her at the edge of the woods, her hair wild, her eyes bright with a knowledge too heavy to bear. The blacksmith, stripped of his tools and his trade, was said to have found work in a distant mining camp, where he spoke little and kept to himself. The schoolteacher, once beloved, faded into obscurity, her name remembered only in the margins of old attendance ledgers. For the children who had survived, the legacy was more complicated. Some grew up to become leaders in the new order, their caution and vigilance shaped by memories they rarely spoke of. Others left Hollow Creek as soon as they were able, seeking lives untouched by the shadow of the woods. A few, marked in ways that could not be seen, struggled with nightmares and visions, their dreams haunted by symbols and voices that no one else could hear. Historians who have studied the records of Hollow Creek note the persistence of certain patterns. Every 30 years, as the moon waxed full in the spring, the town's watch would be doubled, and the elders would gather in the square to recite the old warnings. Children were kept indoors, and the woods were patrolled for signs of trespass. On more than one occasion, a stranger passing through would report seeing a figure at the edge of the trees, a woman with wild hair, or a child with eyes too old for their face, These stories, dismissed by some as superstition, were taken seriously by those who remembered. The physical evidence of what had transpired was carefully preserved. The stones of the altar, though scattered, were marked and mapped, their locations known only to a select few. The journal found in the old mill was locked away in the council's archives, its pages consulted only in times of crisis. The ribbons, the locket, the shoe all were kept in a small, iron-bound chest, a silent testament to the lives interrupted and the innocence lost. Yet, for all the efforts to contain and control the legacy of the past, there remained questions that no one could answer. What had truly happened in the woods? Were the rituals a desperate attempt to appease forces beyond human understanding, or the product of collective madness? Was the darkness that had settled over Hollow Creek a thing summoned, or simply revealed? And most troubling of all, could it ever return? The story of Hollow Creek, as it is told today, is a tapestry woven from fact and rumor, memory and myth. It is a story of collapse and redefinition, of loss and survival, of secrets kept and secrets revealed. It is a story that resists closure, that refuses to be neatly resolved. For every question answered, another arises, and the line between truth and legend grows ever more blurred. In the end, what remains is not certainty, but a kind of haunted wisdom, a recognition that the boundaries between good and evil, light and darkness, are more porous than we would like to believe. The people of Hollow Creek learned, at great cost, that justice is not always clean, that truth is not always comforting, and that the past is never truly past. The final lesson, perhaps, is the most unsettling of all. For if the events of Hollow Creek teach us anything, it is that evil does not always wear a monstrous face. Sometimes it is the product of fear, of silence, of the small compromises made in the name of safety or tradition. Sometimes it is the shadow cast by our own unwillingness to see. And so, the watch continues. The candles are lit, the warnings are spoken, the boundaries are kept. But beneath the rituals and the rules, there lingers a question that has no easy answer, and that echoes in the hearts of all who remember. What would you do? If the darkness came for you, would you turn away? Or would you stand and face it, knowing that the cost might be more than you can bear? Perhaps, in the end, that is the true legacy of Hollow Creek, not the horror of what was done, but the challenge of what remains to be done. The story is not finished. The woods are still there, waiting, and somewhere, in the quiet spaces between memory and forgetting, the past stirs, restless and unresolved. The cycle turns, the watch continues, and the shadows, patient as ever, wait for the moment when the boundaries will falter and the story will begin again.